I came home from church wearing the same blue dress my husband once said made me look peaceful. But when I pulled into my driveway, strangers were carrying my life out of the house while my son stood on the porch holding new keys in his hand. My wedding photographs were stacked beside garbage bags. My late husband's belongings were thrown into the garage like forgotten junk. And the worst part was not the humiliation. It was the way my own son looked at me without guilt, as if I had become nothing more than an obstacle standing between him and $27 million. That was the moment I realized family can break long before it finally falls apart. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 68 years old, and for the last 12 years, I have lived alone in the same weathered house overlooking the Charleston shoreline where my husband and I spent most of our marriage. The ocean has a way of preserving memories. Salt settles into the wood the same way grief settles into a heart. Nothing ever truly leaves. Every morning, I wake before sunrise to the sound of gulls circling above the water and the low groan of fishing boats returning to the harbor. The wooden floors creak beneath my feet exactly the way they did when Michael was alive. Sometimes, in those first quiet seconds after waking, I still expect to hear his heavy footsteps coming down the hallway or smell his coffee brewing in the kitchen. Then reality settles over me again, like cold fog rolling in from the Atlantic. Our house sits near the edge of Charleston, South Carolina, on a narrow stretch of coastal land where expensive modern homes have slowly begun replacing older properties like mine. Developers bought almost every surrounding lot over the last few years. Sleek white mansions rose where old cottages once stood, but my house remained exactly as Michael left it. The faded blue shutters still rattled during storms. The wraparound porch still faced the sea. Hydrangeas still bloomed beneath the windows every spring because my husband planted them with his own hands nearly 30 years ago. I spent my mornings baking bread and peach pies for the church kitchen downtown. It gave structure to my days. After I sold my bakery years earlier to help my son Daniel finish graduate school, baking became the only piece of my old life I truly kept for myself. I never regretted selling the business. Mothers like me rarely regret sacrifices made for their children, even when those sacrifices quietly hollow out the rest of their lives. Daniel became everything Michael dreamed a son could become: successful, respected, wealthy. He worked as an investment executive in Charlotte, North Carolina, handling accounts worth more money than I could imagine. His photographs appeared in business magazines now. His suits probably cost more than my first car. But success changed him slowly, almost invisibly at first. He stopped calling the house home. Instead, he called it the property. That single word stayed with me longer than it should have. His wife, Vanessa, visited even less often than he did. She built an online career presenting luxurious vacations, designer clothes, and perfectly decorated homes to millions of strangers. Whenever she came to Charleston, she looked around my old coastal house with polite discomfort hidden behind perfect makeup and careful smiles. During dinner one evening, she casually mentioned how wealthy neighborhoods near the water were transforming into something more sophisticated. The way she said sophisticated made my chest tighten. Grace, my daughter, noticed it too, though she never said much. She visited every weekend after teaching elementary school nearby. Unlike Daniel, she still sat beside me in the kitchen drinking sweet tea while listening to old stories she had already heard 100 times. Daniel's son Noah reminded me most of the boy Daniel once was: quiet, thoughtful, restless around adults pretending to be happy. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone on the porch watching lightning flicker beyond the dark ocean horizon. Along the Charleston coast, storms rarely announce themselves loudly at first. They arrive quietly, gathering strength far away before finally reaching shore. Deep down, I think I already knew one was coming for my family. The older I became, the quieter my house seemed to grow. Silence settled into the walls like moisture from the ocean air, creeping into every corner of my life. Some mornings, while watering Michael's hydrangeas beside the porch, I caught myself speaking to him out loud as if he were still standing nearby, with dirt on his hands and sunlight on his shoulders. Grief changes shape over time. It no longer crashes through you like a wave. Instead, it lingers like a tide that never fully pulls away. Daniel called less often that year. When he did, our conversations felt rushed and strangely formal. He asked about bills, insurance, property taxes, and maintenance costs with the detached tone of a man reviewing financial reports. Rarely did he ask how I actually felt. Grace noticed it before I admitted it to myself. She watched me pretend not to care after each short phone call ended. Only Noah still spoke to me the way family once did. He sent simple messages asking about the fishing boats, the garden, or recipes he remembered from childhood summers in Charleston. Sometimes he asked me to describe stories about his grandfather. Those conversations became small islands of warmth inside increasingly cold days. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon, everything changed. A law office in Savannah, Georgia, called to inform me that Harold Whitmore had passed away from heart failure 3 days earlier. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table after the call ended. Harold had served beside Michael during military service decades ago. They remained close long after the war ended, even while their lives moved in completely different directions. Michael built a modest life repairing fishing equipment along the coast. Harold became one of the wealthiest real estate developers in the Southeast. Still, Harold never forgot where he came from. I remembered one summer evening nearly 20 years earlier when he stood on our porch drinking whiskey beside Michael while thunder rolled over the ocean. Harold once said that if anything ever happened to him, Michael's family would never struggle again. At the time, we laughed at the dramatic promise. None of us imagined he truly meant it. The moment Daniel heard about Harold's death, his entire demeanor shifted. He insisted we all attend the official reading of the will in Savannah together. Vanessa suddenly called me twice in 1 week, speaking with artificial sweetness that felt rehearsed. During dinner at my house before the trip, Daniel repeatedly asked questions about the property deed, zoning laws, and nearby waterfront sales. I noticed him studying coastal maps on his tablet late into the evening while Vanessa photographed my ocean view for her social media account. For the first time in my life, I felt like strangers were quietly measuring pieces of my home. The law office in Savannah overlooked the riverfront district, all polished marble and dark glass. Harold's attorney maintained a calm professional expression while reviewing stacks of legal documents. Then he announced that Daniel Brooks would inherit $27 million through Harold's estate and investment holdings. The room shifted instantly. Vanessa nearly stopped breathing. Daniel leaned forward so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Grace looked stunned. I felt proud at first, truly proud. After everything Michael and I sacrificed, our son would never struggle again. Then the attorney handed me a sealed, handwritten envelope bearing Harold's signature. I noticed Daniel staring at the envelope harder than he looked at me. The attorney began mentioning additional private conditions tied to certain distributions, but Daniel interrupted smoothly, suggesting the legal details could be reviewed later to avoid unnecessary confusion. Something cold moved through me at that moment. Wealth does not create greed overnight. Sometimes it simply removes the mask hiding it. That evening, alone in my Savannah guest room, I finally opened Harold's letter. The first sentence made my hands tremble. Eleanor, if Daniel ever asked you to leave your home, you must not trust him. I barely slept after reading Harold Whitmore's letter in Savannah. Long after midnight, I remained seated beside the small hotel window overlooking the river, staring at the single sentence that refused to leave my mind. I read it over and over until the words blurred together beneath the yellow bedside lamp. If Daniel ever asked you to leave your home, you must not trust him. I kept trying to explain it away. Harold was old. Perhaps illness had made him suspicious near the end of his life. Perhaps he misunderstood something Daniel said during business conversations. Mothers survive by creating excuses for their children. We build entire emotional shelters from denial when the truth feels unbearable. The next morning, Daniel behaved almost unusually cheerful during breakfast. He talked constantly about future investments, luxury redevelopment projects, and opportunities spreading along the Charleston waterfront. Every sentence sounded polished, rehearsed, and strangely cold beneath the surface. He spoke about neighborhoods the way fishermen discuss weather patterns or businessmen discuss stock prices. As we drove back toward Charleston, I noticed how often he referred to homes as assets and families as financial obstacles standing in the path of progress. Vanessa joined in occasionally, criticizing older coastal properties for looking outdated beside modern developments. Noah sat silently in the back seat with his headphones around his neck, staring out the window as though he wanted to disappear from the conversation entirely. Once we returned home, Daniel began visiting almost every day. At first, part of me felt hopeful. I convinced myself that the inheritance had somehow brought my son closer again. But gradually, his visits stopped feeling personal. He spent more time examining paperwork than speaking to me. He walked through storage rooms, measuring walls and windows with his phone. Survey markers suddenly appeared near neighboring lots along the shoreline. Within days, construction vehicles arrived nearby, tearing down old homes that had stood for decades. The sound of demolition spread through the neighborhood like distant thunder. Then Daniel finally told me the truth. He had partnered with a luxury resort developer planning to transform the entire waterfront district into an exclusive coastal destination. Restaurants, boutiques, private docks, and high-end vacation villas would replace nearly everything surrounding my home. According to Daniel, the project would reshape Charleston's future. My house stood directly in the center of the proposed entrance. He presented glossy brochures for private retirement communities with ocean views and medical staff available around the clock. Vanessa described them with careful enthusiasm, while casually remarking that the neighborhood was evolving into something more sophisticated. I sat quietly while listening to strangers discuss my life like outdated furniture needing relocation. All I could think about was Michael building our porch by hand beneath brutal summer heat, while Daniel ran barefoot through the yard chasing fireflies at dusk. The same house now embarrassing him had once protected him from storms. A few evenings later, Noah quietly apologized while helping me carry groceries inside. Shame weighed heavily in his young eyes. That moment frightened me more than anything else. Children only apologize for adults when the damage has already begun. The following Sunday, I left for church seeking peace I could no longer find at home. During the service, my thoughts drifted constantly toward Harold's warning letter folded inside my purse. When I returned that afternoon, a moving truck stood in my driveway. Workers carried furniture through my front door while cardboard boxes covered the lawn. My bedroom had already been emptied. Michael's military medals and our wedding photographs were stacked carelessly inside the garage. Daniel stood calmly on the porch, holding a new set of keys. This house is ruining my future. The cracked wedding photograph lying inside an open box shattered something inside me far deeper than anger. As the ocean wind blew across the yard and church clothes clung to my skin, I realized I had become homeless while standing on my own property. I remained standing in the driveway long after Daniel changed the locks. Ocean mist clung to my church clothes, while movers carried pieces of my life past me as if I were invisible. None of them looked directly at my face. They lifted boxes, wrapped furniture, and walked through my front door with the mechanical indifference of men completing another ordinary job. My son stood on the porch calmly explaining relocation plans, as though he were discussing hotel reservations instead of destroying his mother's life. He kept repeating that everything was temporary, that the retirement residence offered security, medical care, and comfort better suited for someone my age. What frightened me most was not his cruelty. It was the complete absence of emotion behind it. Daniel never once asked what I wanted, Heidi. He never asked whether I was frightened or heartbroken. He spoke only about schedules, contracts, and efficiency. Meanwhile, Vanessa supervised the movers from the lawn, pointing toward furniture she considered unnecessary. I watched Michael's old rocking chair placed beside a pile of discarded items near the curb. He used to sit in that chair every evening after work while listening to the waves beyond the porch. Seeing it treated like trash hurt more deeply than I could explain. Construction noise thundered constantly from nearby properties being demolished for the new resort project. The sound blended with gulls crying above the shoreline and neighbors quietly watching through windows. Shame spread through me so heavily I could barely breathe. I felt publicly erased from my own existence. Grace arrived almost an hour later after Noah secretly contacted her. The moment she stepped from her car and saw the moving truck, her face changed completely. Horror became anger so quickly it almost frightened me. She confronted Daniel immediately, while I stood frozen beside stacked cardboard boxes smelling faintly of salt water and old wood. Daniel defended everything as necessary business strategy. He spoke about market timing, investor pressure, and future development opportunities. Grace looked at him the way strangers look at criminals on the evening news. She refused to let me go to the retirement facility. Instead, she quietly gathered my remaining belongings and drove me to her small house across town. During the drive, I did not cry. The pain had moved somewhere deeper than tears. Betrayal sometimes arrives so violently that the mind protects itself through numbness. Grace's little home felt crowded, warm, and alive compared to the hollow silence waiting inside my old house, now occupied by strangers and developers. A few nights later, Noah arrived unexpectedly after dark. He looked exhausted and nervous, constantly checking the street through Grace's living room curtains. He admitted overhearing arguments between Daniel and Vanessa about hidden conditions attached to Harold Whitmore's inheritance. According to Noah, Daniel became obsessed after privately reviewing additional legal documents in Savannah. Hearing fear in my grandson's voice broke something inside me all over again. That same evening, Noah handed me a small locked metal box he had secretly taken from Daniel's office. Daniel apparently panicked after realizing it was missing. Inside were property maps, legal copies, and a USB drive labeled Whitmore Supplemental Conditions. My hands trembled while opening the documents. Certain phrases immediately stood out: revocation clauses, conditional inheritance language, property forfeiture requirements. Harold had hidden something enormous inside his will. Near midnight, while Grace slept upstairs, I inserted the USB drive into her old laptop. The screen flickered before revealing Harold Whitmore seated alone in his study. Then His recorded voice filled the dark room. If Daniel Brooks removes Eleanor Brooks from her home, he forfeits every dollar I left him. The room remained completely silent after Harold Whitmore's recorded message ended. The old laptop screen reflected pale light across Grace's kitchen while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Noah looked terrified beside me. Grace stared at the frozen image of Harold as though she could force him to explain how our family had reached this point. My hands would not stop trembling. Harold continued speaking in the recording after a brief pause, his voice weaker but steady with conviction. He explained that the inheritance had never been intended as simple wealth. It was meant to measure character. According to Harold, Michael Brooks believed loyalty mattered more than money, and dignity mattered more than status. Harold said fortunes destroy people when gratitude disappears from their hearts. Then he explained the full condition attached to Daniel's inheritance. Daniel would only keep the $27 million if I remained living peacefully inside my Charleston home without manipulation, pressure, or forced relocation. Any attempt to remove me from the property automatically revoked the inheritance entirely. Every dollar would instead transfer into a community restoration foundation, honoring Michael's memory. I closed my eyes after hearing those words. Relief and heartbreak collided inside me so violently I could barely breathe. Harold had seen the danger long before I did. Somewhere beneath all my excuses and denial, another truth hurt even more deeply. My own son destroyed himself the moment greed mattered more to him than family. Grace wanted immediate legal action. Anger radiated from her like heat from fire. Noah, however, looked frightened in a quieter way. He admitted Daniel had become increasingly paranoid at home after Savannah. Arguments between Daniel and Vanessa grew constant. His temper worsened whenever anyone questioned business decisions connected to the resort project. Listening to Noah speak about his father felt unbearable. As dawn approached, memories I had buried years earlier slowly returned. Daniel refusing to wear old sneakers because classmates mocked him. Daniel hiding report cards unless they were perfect. Daniel avoiding friends visiting our modest home near the shoreline. Michael once warned me that shame about poverty could poison a person quietly over time. I never fully understood what he meant until now. The following morning, Grace contacted Olivia Carter, a respected probate attorney in Charleston specializing in estate litigation. Olivia reviewed Harold's files carefully for nearly 3 hours without speaking much. Her expression darkened page by page. Finally, she confirmed the clause was completely legitimate and fully enforceable under South Carolina probate law. Daniel had concealed critical inheritance conditions from every beneficiary involved in the estate. Worse still, Olivia uncovered evidence that Daniel already borrowed heavily against the expected inheritance before probate finalized. He signed investment agreements connected to the luxury resort project weeks earlier. If the inheritance disappeared now, financial collapse would follow almost immediately. For the first time, genuine fear entered my thoughts. Cornered people become dangerous. That evening, Grace drove me quietly past my old neighborhood. Construction fencing surrounded most nearby properties, already scheduled for demolition. Bright development signs advertised future luxury coastal living where families once gathered for summer cookouts and church picnics. Lights glowed inside my house. Strangers moved through rooms containing every memory Michael and I built together. My life was being converted into commercial square footage. The next morning, Olivia placed Harold's original signed probate documents across Grace's kitchen table. Outside, storm winds bent the hydrangeas growing beside the porch, bruising their blue petals against the rain. Olivia explained that one signature from me would trigger complete revocation of Daniel's inheritance. I stared at the papers for a very long time. For the first time since Daniel changed the locks, I understood something clearly. protecting my son from consequences was no longer love. I did not sleep the night before the probate meeting in Charleston. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw two versions of Daniel at once. One was the frightened little boy who once ran into my arms during thunderstorms because he believed I could protect him from anything. The other was the man who changed the locks on my home while I sat in church praying for my family. The distance between those two people felt impossible to understand. Grace stayed awake with me most of the night. She kept insisting that none of this was my fault, but mothers carry guilt the way old houses carry moisture. It settles into every crack over time. Noah quietly admitted that Daniel had barely slept in weeks and had started drinking heavily after learning the resort investors were demanding immediate progress on the waterfront project. Vanessa, according to Noah, only pushed harder each day. Olivia Carter spent the morning preparing legal documents with frightening calmness. She explained that nearly every major investor connected to the resort expected Daniel's inheritance money to finalize construction financing. Banks, executives, attorneys, and development partners already viewed the project as inevitable. If Harold Whitmore's revocation clause activated publicly, the entire financial structure would collapse instantly. Even then, part of me still hesitated. I never wanted revenge against my son. I only wanted my home, my dignity, and some small piece of peace before the end of my life. Olivia listened quietly before reminding me that truth and revenge are not the same thing. Accountability only feels cruel to people benefiting from deception. That sentence stayed with me. Daniel called repeatedly throughout the morning. I watched his name appear on my phone again and again without answering. When I finally listened to one voicemail, his voice sounded strained beneath forced confidence. Vanessa also left messages pretending concern for family unity. For the first time, I recognized manipulation immediately, instead of mistaking it for love. The probate meeting took place inside a luxury hotel conference room overlooking Charleston Harbor. Thick fog rolled across the water outside, blurring the outlines of boats and buildings until everything appeared uncertain and distant. Investors filled the long conference table discussing timelines and projected profits, while assistants carried coffee trays between conversations. Daniel looked exhausted when he entered. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his expensive suit appeared wrinkled for the first time in his adult life. Vanessa still carried herself with polished confidence, though she avoided standing too close to him. Daniel refused to look directly at me. When Olivia formally introduced Harold Whitmore's supplemental probate documents, confusion spread across the room almost immediately. Daniel attempted to interrupt her presentation several times, but Olivia continued steadily. She presented the signed revocation clause, Harold's recorded testimony, and legal evidence proving I had been removed from my home against my will. The room fell completely silent. I watched realization move across the investors' faces one by one. Resort executives began whispering urgently among themselves, while attorneys flipped through contracts with visible panic. Vanessa slowly stepped farther away from Daniel, as though physical distance might protect her from consequences. Then Daniel finally broke. He accused me of destroying his future, his career, and everything he built. But even while listening to him, I understood something tragic. Daniel still believed money was the only thing standing between him and humiliation. Somewhere deep inside, he remained terrified of becoming that poor child again. When Olivia asked whether I wished to trigger the revocation officially, every person in the room waited for my answer. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the papers. Within minutes, investors walked out. Financing disappeared. The resort project collapsed around Daniel like a building losing its foundation. By the time the room emptied, my son sat alone at the enormous conference table, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. And somehow, I knew losing the money would not be the worst thing he was about to face. If you are still with me after that shocking confrontation, comment number 6 below and let us move into chapter 7, because losing $27 million may be the smallest punishment waiting for this son. By the next morning, Charleston already knew what happened. Financial blogs published articles questioning the collapse of the luxury waterfront project. Local newspapers reported hidden inheritance conditions and possible probate deception involving one of the city's rising investment executives. Within hours, larger business outlets picked up the story. Though most avoided directly naming me, enough details leaked for neighbors, church friends, and former customers to understand the truth. Daniel Brooks had evicted his elderly mother from her home and lost $27 million because of it. I expected to feel victorious after signing the revocation papers. Instead, I felt exhausted in a way sleep could not repair. Public justice does not erase private grief. Watching strangers discuss my family like entertainment left a hollow ache inside me that grew heavier each day. Grace worried constantly about media attention becoming crueler. Noah refused to return to Daniel's apartment, admitting he no longer felt emotionally safe there. Vanessa, meanwhile, moved quickly to protect herself. She deleted years of photographs from social media and quietly removed Brooks from several branding accounts connected to her online business. Reputation mattered more to her than loyalty ever had. Daniel's financial world collapsed with shocking speed. Investors withdrew completely from the resort project. Banks suspended negotiations tied to development financing. Business partners stopped returning his calls. Olivia informed me that state investigators had begun reviewing possible probate misconduct and concealment of legal conditions. Civil lawsuits and professional disciplinary hearings could follow if additional evidence surfaced. Still, none of that erased the simple fact that Daniel remained my son. Grace struggled to understand why I could not completely hate him. But motherhood survives in strange places long after trust dies. Love becomes quieter, more painful, and harder to explain, yet somehow it remains alive beneath everything else. A violent storm swept through Charleston 2 days later. Heavy rain flooded portions of the harbor district and damaged temporary construction fencing surrounding the failed development site. That afternoon, I drove alone back toward my old neighborhood for the first time since Daniel forced me out. The property looked abandoned. Sections of fencing leaned sideways in muddy ground, while torn resort banners flapped violently in ocean wind. My hydrangeas had been crushed beneath construction equipment tracks. Part of the porch railing Michael built decades earlier now hung splintered and broken. I walked slowly through the yard, feeling as though I were visiting the remains of someone else's life. Inside the garage, cardboard boxes still sat untouched beneath leaking ceilings. I found Michael's old toolbox half covered in dust near the back wall. One rusted work glove remained folded beside it exactly where he must have left it years ago. That small sight finally shattered whatever emotional control I still possessed. I sat on the cold garage floor, holding that worn leather glove against my chest, while grief poured through me harder than tears. Not only grief for Michael or the house itself, but grief for the family we once believed we had built together. Meanwhile, Daniel became increasingly isolated. Noah quietly admitted Daniel spent entire nights drinking alone inside his luxury apartment, surrounded by unopened legal notices and silent phones. Then Vanessa officially filed for divorce, citing financial deception and reputational damage. Online articles soon gave Daniel a cruel nickname, the son who evicted his mother. I refused every interview request Olivia warned me about. Public humiliation would not heal anything. One rainy evening, Daniel finally appeared outside Grace's house unexpectedly. He looked thinner than I remembered, unshaven and exhausted beneath soaked clothes. Grace initially refused to let him inside while Noah watched silently from the hallway. but Daniel no longer defended himself. Standing beneath the cold rain on the porch, he looked at me with something I had not seen in years: fear. I do not know how to live after losing everything. Rainwater dripped from Daniel's coat onto Grace's porch floor while we stood facing each other in silence. For the first time in years, I did not see the confident investment executive obsessed with appearances and control. I saw exhaustion. His face looked older somehow, stripped bare without wealth, contracts, or status protecting him from himself. Grace remained tense beside the doorway, watching him with open distrust. Noah looked even more conflicted. He still loved his father, but fear lingered behind his eyes now, as though he no longer trusted what Daniel might become under pressure. I finally allowed Daniel inside. Dinner that evening felt painfully quiet. The sound of silverware against plates echoed louder than conversation. Daniel barely touched his food and avoided looking directly at anyone. He appeared smaller sitting at Grace's modest kitchen table than he ever had inside luxury hotels or business meetings. Late that night, he finally admitted the truth he spent years hiding. He told me he became obsessed with never feeling poor again. As a child, he hated wearing secondhand clothes and listening to wealthy classmates mock working families along the Charleston coast. Every humiliation buried itself deeper inside him until success stopped being ambition and became survival. Money, according to Daniel, felt safer than people. Listening to him speak, I realized fear corrupted my son long before greed ever did. Somewhere over the years, he stopped viewing human beings emotionally and began viewing everything transactionally. Homes became investments. Relationships became opportunities. Even family became negotiable once enough money entered the room. He admitted Vanessa encouraged the resort project aggressively, but he did not blame her for his choices anymore. For the first time, he sounded less defensive than lost. The following morning, Olivia informed me privately that investigators could still pursue additional legal action against Daniel if I chose to cooperate fully. Civil lawsuits remained possible as well. Grace strongly believed I should let every consequence fall on him without interference. Part of me agreed with her, but that night, while repairing one of Michael's damaged work gloves at Grace's kitchen table, I found myself thinking about something my husband once said after Hurricane Hugo destroyed half our neighborhood decades earlier. Michael believed broken things still carried value if someone cared enough to repair them honestly. Noah quietly sat beside me while I stitched torn leather together beneath the lamplight. Eventually, he admitted he feared becoming like his father someday. Hearing that confession from a 16-year-old boy nearly broke my heart all over again. I explained that blood does not decide who we become. Choices do. Over the next several days, Daniel began helping silently around Grace's house. He repaired loose shelves, cleaned storm debris from the yard, and awkwardly cooked breakfast one morning without being asked. Nobody praised him. Trust rebuilds slowly after betrayal, especially betrayal this deep. A week later, Daniel accompanied me back to the Charleston property for the first time since the resort collapsed. We walked quietly through crushed hydrangeas and broken porch boards, while ocean wind carried the smell of salt and wet wood across the ruined yard. Then Daniel found Michael's damaged toolbox near the garage. Something inside him finally cracked. He admitted he spent years feeling ashamed of where he came from. Standing there among the wreckage, I realized the true tragedy was never our poverty. The tragedy was forgetting love while chasing status. That evening, I informed Olivia I would not pursue additional personal lawsuits against Daniel. He had already lost his career, his marriage, his reputation, and the inheritance. You will spend the rest of your life earning back what money cannot buy. If this story has touched your heart so far, comment number 8 below before we move into the final outcome of this family's journey. Because sometimes redemption begins only after someone loses everything they once worshipped. By early spring, Charleston finally began shedding the gray heaviness left behind by storm season. Warmer air drifted inland from the harbor, and small patches of color slowly returned to gardens damaged during winter. Healing arrived quietly along the coast, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough each day to remind people survival was still possible. I moved back into part of my house after repairs made the structure safe again. Many rooms remained unfinished, and sections of the porch still smelled of fresh lumber and paint. Several windows had been replaced, though faint water stains lingered along the hallway ceiling like scars refusing to disappear completely. The hydrangeas surprised me most. Despite everything they endured, tiny blue blooms began appearing again beside the porch where Michael planted them decades earlier. Watching those flowers return felt strangely personal. Daniel's life looked entirely different now. The luxury apartment was gone along with his career in finance. Public humiliation followed him constantly online, where people still referred to him as the son who evicted his mother. At first, I worried shame might destroy him completely. Instead, it seemed to strip away parts of him that success once hid. Court agreements connected to the probate investigation required Daniel to complete community service hours through the Michael Brooks Community Restoration Foundation. Harold Whitmore's revoked inheritance officially funded the organization several months earlier. The foundation now helped older workers displaced by coastal redevelopment projects by providing vocational training, temporary housing support, and legal assistance. Harold somehow transformed our family tragedy into protection for strangers. Daniel volunteered there quietly every week. He repaired donated furniture, unloaded supply trucks, and handled maintenance work without complaint. Some volunteers still refused to speak to him after learning who he was. Others whispered when he entered rooms. Daniel accepted every humiliation silently. One afternoon, I watched him help an elderly widower carry heavy supply boxes through cold spring rain. There was no audience watching him, no investors, no cameras, no advantage to gain. For the first time in years, I recognized genuine compassion returning to my son slowly and painfully. Noah spent most weekends helping me repair the property. Together, we restored old cabinets using Michael's tools, and I taught him recipes his grandfather once loved. The sound of Noah laughing inside the workshop healed parts of me I thought were permanently broken. Grace remained cautious around Daniel, though some of her anger softened over time. Forgiveness, I realized, is not trust magically restored overnight. It is simply leaving room for change without pretending the damage never happened. One morning, I visited Michael's grave carrying fresh hydrangeas from the recovering garden. Standing there alone beneath quiet oak trees, I silently admitted our son lost his way long before money entered his life. But perhaps losing everything finally forced him to see himself clearly. Later that week, Daniel discovered old family photographs while cleaning storage boxes in the garage. I watched him sit alone for nearly an hour staring at faded images of fishing trips, birthday cakes, and summer evenings on the porch. At sunset that same day, Daniel helped me repaint part of the damaged railing facing the ocean. Neither of us spoke much. Some wounds heal more honestly through quiet presence than dramatic apologies. Before going inside, I noticed him carefully rehanging Michael's old workshop nameplate above the repaired door, instead of replacing it with something newer. For the first time in many years, I allowed myself to believe our family might still return in a different form. 1 year after the inheritance scandal destroyed the Charleston Resort project, summer finally returned to the coast with calm skies and warm ocean winds. The storms that once seemed endless had passed, leaving behind damage that never fully disappeared, but no longer controlled everyday life. My house looked different now. The porch had been rebuilt carefully using salvaged wood from the original structure Michael built decades earlier. The hydrangeas bloomed stronger than I expected, spreading thick blue clusters beneath the windows, as though the garden itself refused to surrender permanently. Sometimes healing happens quietly, while nobody notices. The Michael Brooks Community Restoration Foundation grew far beyond anything I imagined possible. What began as legal fallout from family betrayal slowly became one of the most respected support programs along the Charleston shoreline. Older workers displaced by luxury redevelopment projects received temporary housing, vocational retraining, and financial counseling through the organization. For the first time in my life, people viewed me not as someone abandoned by family, but as someone who helped others rebuild theirs. Daniel worked full-time for the foundation now. He coordinated repair crews, handled deliveries, and spent long days helping restore damaged homes for elderly residents who could not afford contractors. Some people still distrusted him completely. Others whispered when they recognized his name from old news articles. Redemption, I learned, is never instant. It survives only through consistency and humility. Daniel accepted every consequence quietly. Grace eventually joined the foundation leadership team and developed educational programs for older adults forced into career changes late in life. Noah prepared for college while spending weekends restoring Michael's old fishing boat with Daniel beside the dock. Watching them work together often reminded me of summers long ago before ambition poisoned so many things inside our family. One evening, while carrying supplies onto the porch, Daniel casually referred to the Charleston house as home again. The word caught me off guard. For years, he called it property, as though emotional attachment weakened its value. Hearing home return to his voice felt small to anyone else, but mothers noticed the quiet changes nobody announces aloud. During the foundation's one-year anniversary gathering, Olivia Carter congratulated me for choosing restoration over destruction. I understood what she meant. Revenge may punish people temporarily, but responsibility changes them slowly from the inside. Later that afternoon, several elderly residents personally thanked me for helping them stay near the communities they loved after redevelopment projects forced neighbors away. Standing there listening to their stories, I finally realized Harold Whitmore's true gift was never the inheritance itself. He gave us truth before greed destroyed everything permanently. A few days later, Daniel visited Michael's grave alone. Noah later told me he left behind the expensive designer watch he once treasured during his finance career. I understood the symbolism immediately. Some identities must die before better ones can survive. That evening, our family gathered on the repaired porch overlooking the Atlantic Ocean while warm sunset light spread across the water. Daniel apologized quietly one final time, not asking forgiveness anymore, only acknowledging the pain he caused. As I watched Noah and Daniel repairing fishing nets beside the hydrangeas Michael planted long ago, I understood something clearly at last. In the end, the most valuable thing my son inherited was the chance to become human again. Sometimes life does not break people all at once. Sometimes it happens slowly, through pride, silence, greed, and the painful belief that success matters more than love. But even after betrayal, loss, and humiliation, there are still moments when people can choose honesty over ego and responsibility over selfishness. Real healing never comes from money, revenge, or public victory. It comes from facing the truth and learning how to live with compassion again. The deepest scars often leave behind the most important lessons. A home is never just walls and land. Family is never measured by status or wealth. And dignity becomes most valuable when the world tries to take it away. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If this journey touched your heart in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more emotional family stories and meaningful life lessons.